So part of creating and establishing your personal brand and your story is making sure, one, you have the content. In a practical sense, I would start to share the beginnings of your story as soon as possible. People want to know what you're up to. You never know what connections you could have. People like, oh, well, I have a short-term rental too, or I just transitioned out of this role into another role. People want to be able to help you along in your journey. So don't be afraid to be a beginner in the space. So I just hopped off the episode with Lindsay Dowd, and she had so many amazing insights into leadership, LinkedIn, building your network and your connections. And one of the things I loved about her story was when she left IBM after 23 years and started a new position. And then within the first 6 months, she was fired. And she talked about how that was such a pivotal moment for her. It was soul crushing. And she essentially had to be, she calls it her kicked out of the nest moment. And she was forced to start over and recreate herself. Yes, she has all of her life experience, all of her career experience from 23 years, but she was essentially remaking herself and had the opportunity to reintroduce herself to her network. And that can be really hard. It can be hard to show up in a new space without the security of, a job title or something else. You're just starting fresh. And so many of our mentorship clients have spent years, sometimes decades, in their 9 to 5 and have essentially figured out it's not working for them anymore. And that's fine. But it's hard when that's kind of the cloak we've worn publicly for so long. How do we figure out how to show up in an authentic way, which Lindsay talked about, but also as kind of being afraid, not afraid, but being courageous enough to be vulnerable in that space. And I have had to reinvent myself multiple times over the course of my career. And each time it gets a little bit easier, but it's still stinking hard, guys. And so I wanted to give you guys some strategies for when you're not really sure how to show up publicly on these social media platforms like Instagram or LinkedIn, how you can create content and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm showing up, but also just start to tell your story in an authentic way. We don't all start as experts in what we're moving towards. We all start as a beginner. I haven't always been a 7-figure short-term rental host. I literally started with one property, just like you guys did. So when I was getting started in the short-term rental space, I was coming from a background as a COO and as a lifestyle content creator over at Moderately High Maintenance. And so one of the key things that Moderately High Maintenance taught me was how to create content, a lot of content, and how to create it well. So that was a skill that I brought over with me into the short-term rental space. Examine yourself and say, what skills do I have from all of my life experience? Because none of those skills are wasted. You will use them as a short-term rental host, if that's the route that you're going. So what skills have you acquired throughout your journey that you can use to apply here? So as a content creator, I learned how to really just document life and kind of piece together a story. If you are not doing that, whatever life transition you find yourself in, just start documenting it, even if you're not ready to share it yet. So, what this looks like is making sure that keep your phone with you. I always like to, this is specifically when we're getting into a new short term rental property. I document the heck out of it. I go in when it's empty, whether we're renovating it or not renovating it. I like to document every step of the way. So I am going in and taking multiple camera angles. I am doing landscape and portrait view. So that's vertical and horizontal, guys. I have hundreds of videos, and we're talking not long videos. We're talking 5, 10, 20 seconds of just the rooms because people love to be on the journey with you. So you don't have to post in real time. Just make sure as you're going through that process, you are documenting the beginning stage of it. I always like to get myself talking to the camera, sharing how I feel in that moment. That's how you show up vulnerably. That's how you show up authentically. And like I said, guys, you do not have to post in real time, but I want you to be prepared to be able to share your story when you are ready. It's hard to show up when you still feel like you're a beginner, but it's worth it to start in the beginning creating that content. So when you're 16 properties in like me, I can still point back to those beginning things and say, hey guys, you know what? I was a beginner just like you were. And this is how I was feeling during that time. So part of creating and establishing your personal brand and your story is making sure, one, you have the content. In a practical sense, I would start to share the beginnings of your story as soon as possible. People want to know what you're up to. You never know what connections you could have. People like, oh, well, I have a short term rental too, or I just transitioned out of this role into another role. People want to be able to help you along in your journey. So don't be afraid to be a beginner in the space. 3, I loved what Lindsay was talking about of showing up and giving on platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram without necessarily the expectation to receive back. It's a very selfless act in that. And so when she was saying just write recommendations for people in your network, and your network isn't necessarily your current company, start making a practice to give on those platforms while you're in that phase of being in the middle of a transition from one role to another. You don't necessarily have anything to gain from that, but you might be making a shift. Start thinking about where you're headed and start making deposits in the bank of friendships with the people that you are hoping to be like in the future. They say, oh, well, what can I do for you? Nothing. I'm just here to cheer you on and watch you succeed. You never know when those relationships are going to come back. And, karma is a real thing. Make deposits in that. So if you are in a time of transition, it doesn't mean you can't make progress. So the 3 things that I want you guys to remember, if you are in a transition point in your life, in your career, whatever that may be, document the process. Even if you're not willing to share publicly, make sure that you have that content. So later down the road, you have the befores, how you were feeling, you have that element of your story to be able to share. 2, don't be afraid to show up authentically. Start sharing what you're doing sooner than later. It's okay to be a beginner. And 3, even if you are not in a place of being an expert, start contributing and start paying it forward and building relationships with people who are in the place that you want to be. Start curating that community. Start building those relationships sooner than later, because you never know how that relationship is going to pan out, whether they're going to be your next partner, somebody who has a connection to somebody who might fund a deal, any number of things, guys. There are so many lessons that you can learn just from showing up and being authentic and starting to curate and create your personal brand.